To understand the Pac-Man timeline, all you have to do is simply connect the dots. And I will attempt to do that for you all in this video, for I feel I have finally completed the official Pac-Man timeline of events of all the games in order. Very briefly before we get started, I must emphasize the game Pac-and-Roll, because it tells us a lot about the history of Pac-Man, and we're going to come talk about it quite a bit, about the alien ghost Glovis and the fairy crystal. It's very important. So I just had to very briefly mention that. Now let's get started with the timeline. Chapter 1. The very beginning of the entire history of Pac-Man begins with the video game Pac-Man Adventures in Time. Now I'm not saying the game is the first chapter of the timeline. What I'm saying is, in that video game, Pac-Man Adventures in Time, Pac-Man time travels to different time periods, okay? And one of the first levels in the game is he time travels back to like the caveman era, okay? Like the dawn of man. And in that level, you see the four ancestors of Blinky, Pinky, Inky, and Clyde, and they're chasing him, which is showing the future, which is pretty cool. It's just showing how they're going to be chasing him in the future, you know, Pac-Man. So, since he time traveled back to the caveman era, and there were still ghosts there, okay, so that's the beginning of Pac-Man. That's Chapter 1. You're all with me so far? Alright, moving on. Chapter 2 is all about Sir Pac-a-lot and his fight against Spooky. Now, this is explained to us from Professor Pac-Man in the opening cutscene to Pac-Man World 2. Professor Pac is explaining who Sir Pac-a-lot was and how he defeated the evil ghost Spooky back in the day. Now, it doesn't say what time period this takes place in, but based on the name Sir Pac-a-lot and his outfit, and just like the art and whatever, we can assume it's way in the past, maybe like the Crusades or whatever. So we definitely know that takes place after the caveman era, right? Okay, so now that's the second chapter. Now, I'm not saying Pac-Man World 2, the game, is the second chapter, you know? I'm saying the plight of Sir Pac-a-lot fighting Spooky back in that time. That's the second chapter of Pac-Man in the whole timeline. Chapter 3. Now this is where it gets really interesting, okay? We have to talk again about Pac-and-Roll, okay? The DS game. Now, Glovis was the main villain in the game, and during the gameplay, in the cutscenes, Crystal shows up. She explains that, oh, you've come back to Pac-Land once again, Glovis. And Glovis seems to know Crystal, okay? That's important to know. And earlier in the game, when the ghosts resurrect Glovis, they all talk about how he was banished a long time ago. So the third chapter is not the game Pac-and-Roll, okay? But the third chapter is actually, it takes place in the 1970s. This is my theory, okay? Just stick with me here. The third chapter takes place in the 1970s. It's after the Crusades. Glovis is there, okay? And has a fight with Crystal and the other fairies and whoever other Pacs are there. And this character called Pac-Master is there with them. Now, I have to explain Pac-Master. He first appeared in Pac-and-Roll, okay? And he has, like, a brief encounter, a fight with Glovis. And to me, it kind of seems like they imply that Pac-Master and Glovis have fought before, alright? So, since that happens in the game Pac-and-Roll, the third chapter of the timeline takes place in the 1970s, after the Crusades. Crystal's there fighting Glovis with Pac-Master, okay? This is when Pac-Master was younger. Of course, he was still young in Pac-and-Roll, but whatever, okay? They're all a little bit younger, right? Now, what you have to understand is, to me, my theory is that Glovis is actually supposed to be based off of Elvis Presley. just stick with me, I'll explain it. Now, when Glovis appears for the first time in Pac-and-Roll, he explains to all of them, I am the king of rock and roll, he declares. Okay, he's the king of rock and roll. Who else is the king of rock and roll? Who else said they were? Elvis, of course. And what about the name? Glovis, Elvis, V-I-S at the end of both of their names? Glovis is Elvis, guys. Glovis is the ghost of Elvis. So Elvis died in 1978. So what we can assume is that the third chapter takes place in 1979, a year after Elvis died. and Elvis came back as a ghost and is attacking Pac-Land, right? So he's bad or whatever, and Crystal is fighting him along with Pac-Master, and they defeat him. And he was, and the other ghosts, they explain in Pac-and-Roll in the cutscenes that the other ghost banished him away because he was so dangerous. So, there you go. That's the third chapter. It takes place in 1978 or 1979, okay? That's the third chapter. You with me so far? Cool. Let's keep going. Chapter 4 is the original Pac-Man arcade game. Yes, this is Chapter 4. It takes place in 1980, which is when the video game was officially released, right? So Pac-Man's very young here, okay? Pac-Man was probably born in the 70s or whatever. Maybe Pac-Man was born in the early 70s. So by the time it was 1980 or whatever, he's like a man or whatever. That's the fourth chapter. Now the fifth chapter is going to be Pac-Man Plus, the arcade game. Why? Well, Mrs. Pac-Man is not here yet. It's just Pac-Man alone once again. And the mazes go from blue to green, and there's a little bit of changes, but hey, it technically feels like another series of events because the mazes are a different color. It's a little more difficult. It's a little more interesting. So it's Pac-Man going through more adventures through the mazes again. So the fifth chapter is Pac-Man Plus. Now, not every game in the history of Pac-Man is going to be listed in this timeline because that's way too many games. I could do that, but I just felt like it was unnecessary. Because all the other games that I'll list that aren't in the chapters, you could easily fit them into a lot of different time periods. And I'll explain that later. So basically what I'm saying is only the games with real significance to the timeline of events I'm going to list as chapters. So anyway, moving on. Chapter 6, Ms. Pac-Man, the arcade game. Classic game. Why? Well, this is the first time Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man meet each other. It's explained in the cutscenes, you know. They meet each other for the first time, then they start having fun with each other, and then by Act 3, in the cutscene, the stork comes and it says Junior is born. Okay, so who is Junior? Well, this is the birth of Pac-Man Jr. So he meets Ms. Pac-Man, and Pac Jr. is born. The sixth chapter is the arcade game Ms. Pac-Man. The seventh chapter in the official Pac-Man timeline is the video game Pac-and-Roll. Why? Well, this is the return of Glovis. Crystal explains basically how they've met before. Pac-Master has another fight or encounter with Glovis. We see in the cutscenes Pac-Master interacting with Pac-Man, Ms. Pac-Man, and there's a baby Pac in this game. That is not to be confused with Baby Pac-Man, the daughter of Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man, who comes later. This is a different Baby Pac, and it's explained that this Baby Pac is the sister of Ms. Pac-Man. Yeah, it's weird. I mean, she looks exactly the same as Baby Pac-Man later on, and we literally never see her ever again grow up. So what the hell is that about? Whatever. I don't know. I guess we could see this other Baby Pac, like we can see Ms. Pac-Man's sister in the future, I guess, if they get the rights to Ms. Pac-Man back, which is another pile of Pac shit, but that's another whole other video. In Pac-and-Roll, they do explain that Pac-Man is taken under the wing by Pac-Master, and Pac-Master shows him the ropes of how to be a better Pac and take on the ghosts. Because Pac-Man's still young. And yes, he was defeating ghosts, prior to Pac-and-Roll, but even still, Pac-Master is an old pro. So basically, he's still a Pac in training, and by the time Pac-and-Roll comes and he defeats Glovis and whatever, taken under the wing of Pac-Master, now Pac-Man is better at being, a Pac or whatever, defeating the ghosts. Because in that game, Pac-Master is like the old Jedi Master, and Pac-Man's like Luke, Pac-Master's like Obi-Wan, and this is the brand new adventure. Okay, Chapter 8 is the arcade game Professor Pac-Man. Not a very popular game, but I think it's pretty cool. Anyway, why do I put this as the 8th chapter? Well, you see, there's a theory out there that I do believe that Pac-Master is basically Professor Pac-Man. So, in other words, Pac-Master was Professor Pac-Man when he was younger. So, Pac-Master becomes older, time goes by after Pack and Roll, and now he becomes Professor Pac-Man. They both have a mustache, and it's like now he's a professor, and he teaches people the ways of being a Pac or whatever, to Pac-Man or whatever. And this is what he does in his old age. Like when Pac-Master was younger, he was fighting ghosts, but now Professor Pac-Man is old, and he teaches people stuff. So I consider Chapter 8 to be the arcade game Professor Pac-Man because it confirms that Pac-Master is now old. It confirms that Professor Pac-Man is now... Well, you get it. Chapter 9, I'm going to say, is the arcade game Pac-Mania. God, I love this game. Why do I put it as Chapter 9? Well, Pac-Man's able to jump in this game. That's pretty significant. He's never been able to do that in the games prior. So we can assume that Pac-Man learned this skill of being able to jump from Pac-Master, teaching him. So now his skills have greatly improved ever since Pack and Roll, right? So why not? Chapter 9, Pac-Mania. It fits. Plus, all the classic ghosts are in there, including Sue from Ms. Pac-Man, so why not? Now we come to the year 1982. I'm going to say Chapter 10 is the arcade pinball game Baby Pac-Man. This is a Baby Pac's official first game, right? And only game, but whatever. So this is not Junior Pac-Man, this is the daughter of Pac-Man and Mrs. Pac-Man. This is Baby Pac-Man, and it's her arcade game, so that's Chapter 10. And Chapter 11 is going to be the 1980s Pac-Man cartoon, and which also first came out in 1982. So since both of these things started off in 1982, I put them together as Chapter 10 and 11. Also, in the 80s Pac-Man cartoon, Baby Pac is in there, and she has a female voice with her hair and whatever. So that is Baby Pac. That's their daughter. So there you go. Chapter 12, I'm going to say, is the arcade game Pac-Land. God, I really love this game. It's a little too annoying, but it's still an excellent game. Anyway, why is Pac-Land Chapter 12? Because the arcade game Pac-Land is pretty much based off of the 80s cartoon anyway. So they should be close together in the timeline, pretty much, I think. So that's why I'm putting it right after the 80s cartoon. So Chapter 12 is Pac-Land. Chapter 13, I'm going to say, is the arcade game Pac-N-Pal. It's significant to me because this is the first game that establishes that there are nice ghosts out there, like Miru or Pal from the game that helps Pac-Man defeat the other ghosts. So that's why this game is significant as the 13th chapter. And then we come to Chapter 14, which is the arcade game Junior Pac-Man. That's right. So now Junior is a little bit older, and he's able to eat dots on his own and defeat the ghosts, right? And it's from 1983, so it fits so far in the timeline. I put Junior Pac-Man as Chapter 14 because Chapter 13, Pac-N-Pal, establishes that there are nice ghosts, and like Junior saw that his dad was able to have a friend ghost that helped him, so that made him feel confident to date the daughter of Blinky, Yum Yum, in the cutscenes. So he saw that his dad was able to make friends with a ghost, so now Junior feels confident to make friends with a ghost, and that's how Yum Yum, Blinky's daughter, becomes the girlfriend to Junior Pac-Man. I think they're a super cute couple, but anyway, I mean, we still haven't seen them again, but anyway, maybe they broke up, I don't know. But anyway, so that's why I say Junior Pac-Man takes place after Pac-N-Pal. That's my theory. Alright, we're still in the 80s, so I'm going to say Chapter 15 is the arcade game Super Pac-Man. I love the art for Super Pac-Man, love this game. You'll see why I'm including it as Chapter 15 once I tell you about Chapter 16. After Super Pac-Man, Chapter 16, I'm going to say, is Pac-Man 2: The New Adventures for the Super Nintendo. Why? Because Super Pac-Man, Chapter 15, establishes that Pac-Man can turn super, and he has a cape, and he can fly around, and he has like extra powers, right? From getting like a special power pellet. Since Super Pac-Man establishes that, the next chapter I want to say is Pac-Man 2: The New Adventures, because in Pac-Man 2: The New Adventures, Pac-Man does become Super Pac-Man in the gameplay when he finds like a super power pellet or whatever. So he first started doing that in the 80s, right? So that would be Super Pac-Man. And now, Chapter 16, we are in the 90s, so here we got Pac-Man 2: The New Adventures, Chapter 16. The game also features the first appearance of the Ghost Witch, which is important for Chapter 17, which I'm going to say is the Super Nintendo game Pac-in-Time, where the Ghost Witch returns as the main villain. That's why I include it as Chapter 17, because this is the Ghost Witch era. So she wants revenge, so she tried to defeat Pac-Man in the New Adventures, and it failed, so Chapter 17, another Ghost Witch game. It just fits. And it's from the early 90s, so it works. Chapter 17 is Pac-in-Time. Chapter 18 is the classic game Pac-Man World. That's right, the original Pac-Man World for the PlayStation. One of my favorite childhood video games and one of the greatest video games of all time. The original Pac-Man World. In this game, you got the whole Pac family in the first cutscene. Ms. Pac-Man, Junior Pac-Man, Baby Pac-Man, and of course, well, Pac-Man. And it fits as Chapter 18. I mean, it's a significant game in the history of Pac-Man. Why not? Now, as you may have predicted, Chapter 19, I'm going to say, is Pac-Man World 2. It takes place pretty much after Pac-Man World 1. We have the explanation given to Pac-Man about Sir Pac-a-lot. Pac-Man learns about what he went through with Spooky. So now we've come full circle. Once again, even as Pac-Man is older in Pac-Man World 2, Professor Pac is still teaching Pac-Man stuff about the Pacs. He's still teaching him to be a better Pac, to defeat the ghosts. He's still teaching him stuff. Classic traditional thing. Pac-Man defeats Spooky at the end of the game, and Spooky will always be like the greatest Pac-Man villain ever. Spooky really needs to return. Anyway, Chapter 20. We have Pac-Man World 3. Why not? All the stuff that happens in the first two Pac-Man worlds, and Pac-Man World 3 is connected to the first game especially because of the ghost Orson, who was a villain in Pac-Man World 1 and now becomes a good guy in World 3. Pac-Man World 1, 2, and 3 are a trilogy. They're in order. Got Chapter 18, 19, and 20. Fits. Now I'm going to talk about what I was trying to say earlier. Don't get confused about other games like Pac-Man Adventures in Time or Ms. Pac-Man Maze Madness. Those kind of games, they can fit in during the timeline of the Pac-Man World games, like in between Pac-Man World 1 and 2 or whatever. There's just certain games that you can fit them in certain eras that make sense, pretty much. Those games aren't that significant in the timeline of events of storylines and stuff, so certain games you can fit in anywhere, really. Well, not anywhere, but yeah, I think you know what I mean. I hope you guys know what I mean. This has been a lot of fun, so unfortunately I have to say, sadly, we come to the end of our timeline, I would say. With Chapter 21 is basically the beginning of Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures, the TV series. Let me explain. Chapter 21 is not Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures, okay? That's Chapter 22. But Chapter 21 is the Ghost Wars that they explain in the pilot for Pac-Man and Ghostly Adventures, that they educate the kids, Pac kids in class or whatever, where they show Lord Betrayus as a commander when he used to be a Pac, and the battle he had with his brother and everything during the Ghost Wars, okay? That's Chapter 21. Now, why am I putting this at the end of the timeline? I mean, you'd think this kind of battle, would be like in the past or whatever. But actually, if you look at the screen, like the PowerPoint screen or whatever, the hologram or whatever, the teacher's teaching the kids, very quickly you can see that it has dates on there. So it says the Ghost Wars happened during the year 2005, the year 2522, the year 2522. Okay, so that's way in the future, and that's way past our time. So that's why all the stuff in Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures is all futuristic. Basically, that's why Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures takes place at the end of the timeline, because that show takes place far into the future. We're past the 2000s and the 90s and whatever, and the 2020s. After Pac-Man World 3, Chapter 21 should be the Ghost Wars, like that original era, the whole battle, right? And then Chapter 22, the final chapter, would be just the show, Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures, where Lord Betrayus is now a ghost and whatever. And by the way, I think the Ghost Wars are interesting because, remember what I was saying earlier about Pac-and-Roll, that Pac-Master was basically Obi-Wan Kenobi and Pac-Man was Luke? So it's a parallel to Star Wars, pretty much. Well, the same thing can be said about the Ghost Wars. The Ghost Wars, like that little animation we get to see at the very beginning that shows it? Well, to me, it looks like the Clone Wars from Star Wars. The Ghost Wars, the Clone Wars. I mean, like, basically, Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures is basically, it's the Star Wars Clone Wars cartoon, but with Pac-Man, which is amazing and mind-blowing when you think about it. I mean, the inspiration they got from Star Wars to come up with the ideas and stuff that they did in Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures is fascinating to me. And there you guys have it, Waka Waka, the official Pac-Man timeline. I came up with this to the best of my knowledge of what I think the timeline is in order. It's got chapter 1 through 22. Please leave me any questions you guys have or any inconsistencies I have in this video. I felt like I covered everything, but please let me know if there's something I forgot. I think it'd be interesting. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are amazing. Thank you for all your support. I'll see you guys very soon. Thank you for watching.